Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a candlelit medieval room where the air smells faintly of damp wool, wood smoke, and boiled cabbage. And you're standing there in your own body, being told, very calmly, that everything you feel, think, and are can be explained by four mysterious liquids sloshing around inside you. You probably won't survive this without at least one raised eyebrow. A bearded physician in a robe gestures thoughtfully and assures you that your bad mood, your optimism, your laziness, even your personality flaws are not your fault. It's your humor's. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here.
And if you're listening late at night, feel free to drop your location and local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.
You are now living in a world where psychology is wet. Literally. Medieval popular psychology begins with the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to a tradition inherited from ancient Greek medicine, especially the teachings attributed to Hippocrates and later expanded by Galen, these fluids determine your temperament. Too much blood, and you're cheerful, sociable, maybe a bit impulsive. Excess phlegm, and you're calm, slow, and possibly the kind of person who would be very bad at replying to emails. Yellow bile makes you angry and fiery. Black bile makes you sad, withdrawn, and prone to long stares out of small windows.
This wasn't fringe thinking. This was mainstream, respectable knowledge. Universities taught it. Physicians practiced it. Clergy nodded along thoughtfully. If you felt anxious, depressed, or unusually energetic, the explanation wasn't trauma or stress, it was imbalance. Somewhere inside you, a fluid had decided to misbehave. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed these explanations in a literal sense, or whether many treated them as flexible metaphors for behavior. Either way, the humors shaped how people understood themselves. You can imagine how comforting this might be. You wake up irritable, short-tempered, snapping at people over breadcrumbs on the table. Instead of self-reflection, you get to say, yellow bile again. It's basically medieval astrology, but internal. And unlike modern personality tests, it came with treatment options involving leeches. Bloodletting, of course, is the most famous response. If you had too much blood, and who didn't really, the solution was to remove some. Calm the personality by draining the fluid. Balance the mind by opening a vein. It sounds alarming now, but at the time it made perfect sense. If a pot is too full, you pour some out. If your body is too sanguine, you bleed it. Simple, elegant, slightly horrifying. A quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked is how seasonal this all became. Medieval thinkers believed the humors waxed and waned with the year. Spring made you sanguine, summer choleric, autumn melancholic, winter phlegmatic. Your personality wasn't just inside you, it was synced to the calendar. You weren't moody, it was November. Honestly, some things never change. You're encouraged to manage your humors proactively. Food becomes psychology. Red meat warms and moistens. Lettuce cools and dampens. Wine heats you up. Water calms you down. Your diet is your personality editor. If you're feeling sluggish, eat warming foods. If you're angry, cool yourself with vegetables. Somewhere, a medieval dinner table is quietly trying to fix emotional regulation. What's fascinating is how closely morality and psychology blend here. A balanced person isn't just healthy, they're virtuous. Emotional extremes are suspect. Too much laughter hints at excess blood. Too much sadness suggests black bile, but also spiritual weakness. Mental balance and moral balance are basically roommates sharing a very drafty house. Historians still argue whether this framework discouraged introspection or encouraged it in a different form. On one hand, it externalized responsibility. Your humors made you do it. On the other, it required constant monitoring of mood, diet, sleep, and environment. You were always checking in with yourself, asking how you felt. even if the answer involved bile. There's a gentle humor to how precise this system tried to be. You're not just angry, you're choleric. You're not tired, you're phlegmatic. You're not sad, you're melancholic, which sounds tragic and poetic, and much better suited to lying on a fainting couch. Medieval psychology may have been wrong, but it was never boring.
And here's the quiet, sleepy irony. For all its strange fluids and questionable treatments, the humor system acknowledged something modern psychology also knows. The mind and body are connected. Stress affects digestion. Mood affects health. Environment matters. Medieval thinkers just explained it with liquids instead of neurotransmitters. Same mystery, different containers. As you stand there, listening to the physician drone on about balance, you begin to feel the slow rhythm of this worldview. Nothing is sudden, everything is gradual. You don't snap, you overflow. You don't heal, you rebalance. It's a system built for patience, which makes it oddly perfect for bedtime. And as your thoughts slow, you might even feel a little grateful. If you can blame your bad day on black bile, you can finally stop overthinking it. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll eat something warm, avoid damp air, and trust that your inner fluids will eventually settle down. For now, you just breathe, heavy and even, letting the humors rest.
You drift onward from the softly sloshing world of humors into the open night sky, where medieval psychology stretches its neck upward and squints at the planets. You're told, gently, confidently, that while your blood and bile handle the day-to-day emotional maintenance, your deeper personality settings were installed by the heavens themselves. Somewhere above the clouds, Saturn is doing something ominous, and unfortunately, it's doing it to you.
In this worldview, you are born beneath a particular arrangement of planets, and that cosmic snapshot quietly imprints itself onto your mind. Mars lends courage, aggression, and a tendency to start arguments you cannot finish. Venus bestows charm, affection, and perhaps a suspicious fondness for poetry. Saturn is blamed for gloom, seriousness, and the kind of personality that enjoys accounting. Jupiter encourages optimism and generosity. The moon governs moods, memory, and whether you wake up feeling inexplicably strange on a Tuesday. This isn't casual superstition. Astrology is treated as a serious intellectual discipline, closely tied to medicine and psychology. Learned scholars calculate horoscopes not just for kings, but for illnesses, marriages, and mental states. A physician might examine your urine, check your pulse, and then quietly consult a star chart before offering advice. You're not anxious because of stress. You're anxious because Mercury is misbehaving again. Frankly, Mercury has a lot to answer for.
The mainstream historical fact here is that astrology was taught in medieval universities alongside astronomy and medicine. It was considered a necessary tool for understanding human behavior. The movements of the planets were thought to influence the humors themselves, stirring blood, thickening phlegm, or darkening black bile. Remember that imbalance from earlier? Now imagine it being tugged around like a cosmic marionette.
Historians still argue whether medieval scholars truly believed planets caused behavior directly, or whether astrology functioned as a symbolic language layered onto existing medical theories. Either way, the result is the same. You experience your personality as something partially written before you ever take a breath. There's something oddly soothing about this. You don't have to invent yourself from scratch. Your strengths and weaknesses arrive prepackaged, delivered by Saturn with no receipt. If you're brooding, it's because you were born under a cold planet. If you're impulsive, Mars was feeling energetic that night. Self-blame melts away into stardust.
A quirky detail that feels especially bedtime friendly is how specific this gets. Medieval astrologers divided the sky into houses, each governing aspects of your mental life: memory, imagination, speech, temperament. Your imagination might be ruled by the moon, while your reasoning mind answers to Mercury. Astrology also seeps into moral psychology. A person ruled by Saturn might struggle with melancholy, seriousness, or isolation.
But that doesn't make them evil. It makes them Saturnine. Their task is balance, not punishment. Medieval thinkers often emphasize that planetary influence inclines, but does not compel. You are nudged, not shoved. Free will survives, just under advisement. Historians still argue whether this belief system offered genuine comfort or quietly reinforced social hierarchies. After all, if a king is born under Jupiter, doesn't that explain his authority? And if a peasant is born under Saturn, well, that explains the mud. It's cosmic justification with a calming tone of voice. And yet, there's tenderness here. You're not broken. You're aligned, or misaligned, and alignment can be managed. Talismans, prayers, diets, even colors are used to soften harsh planetary effects. Feeling low? Avoid black clothing. Saturn loves black. Wear something warm and bright. Eat foods that counter coldness. It's emotional self-care, medieval style. Of course, sometimes it drifts into the absurd. There are recorded beliefs that too much exposure to moonlight could cause madness by overstimulating the brain. Lunacy, literally. So if you're pacing restlessly at night, staring out the window, congratulations, you're doing psychology wrong. Please close the shutters. You may notice how neatly this layers onto the humors. Your bile makes you angry, but Mars decides when that anger shows up. Your black bile makes you sad, but Saturn decides how long you linger there. It's a beautifully over-engineered system, like explaining a headache using both plumbing and astronomy. As you slowly breathe, imagining the planets circling in steady silence, there's a calm inevitability to it all. The sky moves. You respond. Tomorrow will come, whether you worry or not. Somewhere above you, Jupiter keeps spinning, completely unconcerned with your feelings, which is oddly reassuring. And as your thoughts drift, you may feel the soft relief of cosmic permission. You don't have to fix everything tonight. The planets are still doing their thing. Your humors are still settling. Sleep, after all, is the one activity universally approved by every medieval authority, earthly or celestial. You continue forward without any real break, drifting from planets overhead to something much closer and harder to ignore, your own skull. Somewhere between astrology and anatomy, medieval popular psychology develops an intense curiosity about the shape of your head, and unfortunately for you, people feel very comfortable commenting on it. You're told, politely but firmly, that the bumps, slopes, and proportions of your skull are quietly advertising your inner character, like a very personal billboard you didn't consent to. This idea doesn't yet have the polished charts and measuring calibers of later phrenology, but the roots are unmistakable. Medieval thinkers inherit an older tradition known as physiognomy, the belief that outward appearance reflects inward nature. If the soul and body are connected, then surely the mind leaves fingerprints on the bones. A broad forehead suggests wisdom. A narrow one hints at poor judgment. A protruding jaw might signal stubbornness, courage, or a tendency to argue with authority, depending on who's doing the judging. The mainstream historical fact here is that physiognomy was widely discussed in medieval texts, translated from ancient Greek and Arabic sources, and circulated among scholars, clergy, and physicians. It wasn't considered silly, it was considered observant. You look, you infer, you nod thoughtfully. Simple. Historians still argue whether these ideas were meant as fixed psychological laws or loose guidelines shaped by cultural bias and storytelling tradition. What makes this especially soothing and mildly alarming is how calmly it's applied. No one is yelling, no one is panicking. A learned man might simply tilt his head, stroke his beard, and remark that your rounded skull suggests a gentle temperament, while silently deciding not to lend you money. It's judgment, but with indoor voices. There's also a strong overlap with morality. Physical traits don't just suggest intelligence or temperament, they hint at virtue. Straight posture implies discipline. Balanced facial features suggest moderation. Asymmetry raises eyebrows, sometimes literally. Your body becomes a moral resume, and your skull is the cover letter. A quirky tidbit that fits perfectly here is the medieval fascination with head injuries and personality change. Chronicles occasionally note that someone became angrier, quieter, or strangely cheerful after a blow to the head. Instead of questioning the brain itself, medieval observers often concluded that the injury altered the balance of humors or reshaped the pathways of the soul. You bonk your head, and suddenly your black bile gets ideas. This leads to a strange kind of proto-neuroscience without neurons. The brain is acknowledged as important, this isn't complete ignorance, but its function is filtered through symbolic thinking. The brain cools the blood, it tempers heat, it houses imagination and memory, but not in the way you'd expect. That part is coming later. For now, the skull is the container that matters most. You can imagine the quiet anxiety this creates. Every bump becomes suspicious. Every childhood fall is retroactively meaningful. Did that low doorway change your personality forever? Possibly. Please stop thinking about it and go back to sleep. Historians still argue whether physiognomy reinforced existing social hierarchies more than it revealed genuine beliefs about psychology. After all, it's very convenient that noble traits often align with noble faces, while peasant traits somehow look peasant-shaped. Funny how that works. But even skeptics of the system participated in it, because once everyone agrees that faces mean something, it's hard not to look. What's interesting is how this blends seamlessly with earlier ideas. Remember the humors? Your skull shape might indicate which humor dominates you. A moist, rounded head suggests phlegm. A dry, angular skull hints at bile. The planets, meanwhile, influence how these traits express themselves over time. You're not just one thing. You're a layered explanation wearing a hat. There's also a surprisingly gentle side to all this. Unlike later pseudosciences that claim absolute certainty, medieval physiognomy often allows for change. Education, discipline, prayer, and proper diet can soften rough traits. A badly shaped skull is not a life sentence. It's more like a warning label. Handle with care. And yes, sometimes it gets unintentionally funny. There are descriptions suggesting that people with large ears are good listeners. That's it. That's the logic. Somewhere, a medieval monk with impressive ears is feeling very validated. You might notice how little emphasis there is on inner emotional experience as we describe it today. Feelings are real, but they're secondary to structure. You don't ask how someone feels, you look at how they're built. Psychology is observational, external, and very confident in its conclusions. As your breathing slows, imagine the calm certainty of this world. No personality quizzes, no self-help books, just a mirror, a ruler, and a man telling you that your forehead explains everything. It's wrong, of course, but it's wrong in a very soothing, methodical way. And as your thoughts grow heavier, you can let go of your own skull for now. No one is measuring it tonight. No one is diagnosing your imagination based on cranial slope. You're allowed to simply rest, bones quiet, humor settling, planets turning, while medieval psychology gently nods, convinced it understands you completely. You drift onward again, barely noticing the transition, because in medieval psychology, transitions are rarely announced. One moment, your skull is being politely judged, and the next, your dreams are under review. Nightfall arrives, candles gutter, and sleep is no longer an escape from analysis, it's a diagnostic tool. As you lie there, wrapped in rough linen, your mind wanders, and medieval thinkers lean in very close, convinced that what you see while asleep is meaningful, actionable, and possibly divine. Dreams are not random here. They are messages. Some come from God, some from demons, some from the body itself, digesting food badly and improvising symbolism. The tricky part is telling which is which. You wake with a vivid image, a river, a falling tower, a talking animal, and instead of shrugging it off, you quietly wonder what's wrong with your health, your soul, or both.
The mainstream historical fact is that medieval dream theory was heavily influenced by ancient authors like Aristotle and later Christian writers who classified dreams into categories. There are divine dreams, sent to instruct or warn. There are natural dreams, caused by bodily processes. And there are deceptive dreams, whispered by less trustworthy spiritual sources. This framework is taught, discussed, and applied with surprising seriousness.
Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced dreams differently or simply interpreted them differently. The dreaming brain hasn't changed much, but the meaning assigned to its nightly theater certainly has. In this world, dreams are not private. They are social artifacts, meant to be discussed with priests, physicians, or that one friend who always has an opinion.
You're encouraged to pay attention to patterns. Repeated dreams matter more than single ones. Nightmares might signal moral anxiety, spiritual danger, or indigestion. Yes, indigestion gets its own category. If you eat too much before bed, especially heavy or spicy food, your dreams become chaotic, heated, and unreliable. Basically, medieval psychology strongly recommends against late-night cheese.
A quirky tidbit that fits perfectly here is the belief that certain dreams could predict mental illness. Persistent visions of darkness, falling, or confusion were sometimes seen as early warnings of melancholy or madness. The dream wasn't the problem, it was the messenger. Ignore it, and things might get worse. Sleep, ironically, could keep you awake with worry. Dreams also serve as moral mirrors. If you dream of theft, violence, or forbidden desire, the concern isn't just the content, it's the implication. Something in your waking life is unbalanced. A humor is dominant. A planet is pressing too hard. Or maybe, and this is said gently, you should pray more.
There's a calm intimacy to this belief. Your mind, unguarded in sleep, is finally honest. Daytime manners fall away. Your soul speaks in metaphor. Medieval thinkers trust this speech more than your waking explanations. You can lie while awake. Dreams, supposedly, do not bother. Historians still argue whether this trust in dreams gave people emotional insight or simply another layer of anxiety. After all, if every unsettling dream carries meaning, rest becomes work. But at the same time, it offers structure. Bad dreams are not meaningless terror. They're puzzles with solutions.
You might consult a dream manual. These texts list common symbols and their interpretations. Water often relates to emotion or health. Flying could mean ambition or spiritual elevation. Being chased suggests imbalance or unresolved guilt. Teeth falling out? That one's been worrying people for centuries. Some things really are timeless. Dream interpretation also blends seamlessly with earlier ideas. Your humors influence the type of dreams you have. Excess black bile leads to dark, heavy visions. Too much blood brings lively, sometimes ridiculous dreams. The planets decide when dreams are most truthful. The moon, of course, plays a starring role. Remember the fear of moonlight causing madness? It also sharpens dreams, for better or worse. There's even debate among scholars about whether dreams originate in the heart or the brain. Yes, that argument is still happening quietly in the background. For now, it's enough to know that your body and soul collaborate on dream production, like an overworked writing team.
And sometimes the explanations drift into gentle absurdity. A dream of fire might mean fever, or anger, or hell. Context matters. Please provide context. Medieval psychology is very polite about this. As your own thoughts soften, you may notice how comforting this can be. Your dreams are allowed to mean something, but not everything. Not every image is a prophecy. Some are just the result of yesterday's soup. That balance between significance and dismissal is what medieval thinkers aim for, even if they don't always hit it.
So you lie there, breathing slowly, letting images come and go without chasing them. If something strange floats up, it's okay. It's just your mind doing what minds have always done, while history quietly watches, ready to interpret in the morning. For now, you rest, your dreams free to wander, unexamined, at least until dawn.
You move forward without noticing the scene, because medieval thinking loves a slow slide. and now you find yourself resting in the long shadow of melancholy. This is not just sadness. This is a condition, a temperament, a lifestyle, and, strangely, a badge of intellectual honor. If you feel heavy, thoughtful, withdrawn, or prone to staring at nothing in particular for long stretches of time, medieval psychology doesn't rush to cheer you up. Instead, it nods approvingly and says, yes, this one might be brilliant.
Melancholy is tied to black bile, the darkest and most suspicious of the four humors. Too much of it cools and dries the body, slowing movement, quieting speech, and turning the mind inward. In excess, it leads to despair, fear, and paralysis of thought. But in moderation, just enough, it sharpens the intellect. This is the balance medieval thinkers become almost poetic about.
The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval scholars widely believed that many philosophers, scholars, and artists were melancholy by nature. This idea traces back to ancient texts, especially a famous problem attributed to Aristotle, asking why so many great thinkers are melancholy. Medieval writers copy, debate, and expand this idea enthusiastically. Intelligence, it seems, comes with a side of gloom. Historians still argue whether this belief genuinely encouraged intellectual life or simply romanticized suffering. Either way, it creates a powerful narrative. Your sadness is not meaningless. It may be evidence of depth. You're not broken. You're tuned differently.
This can be comforting. Instead of being urged to smile, you're encouraged to manage your melancholy carefully. Too much leads to madness. Too little leads to foolishness. The ideal scholar walks a narrow emotional path, serious but not despairing, quiet but not withdrawn. It's emotional tightrope walking, performed slowly, in candlelight.
A quirky tidbit that fits beautifully here is the belief that excessive study itself causes melancholy. Reading too much dries out the brain. Thinking too hard overheats certain faculties while cooling others. Scholars are advised to take walks, listen to music, eat warming foods, and occasionally talk to other humans. Medieval psychology invents burnout centuries early. Music, in particular, is prescribed as therapy. Certain modes are believed to lift the spirit, gently warming the cold, melancholy temperament. Lutes, harps, and singing voices are not entertainment. They're medicine. Somewhere a medieval musician is being medically useful without knowing it.
Melancholy also becomes morally complicated. Too much sadness can slide into acedia, a kind of spiritual lethargy or despair. This is no longer noble, it's dangerous. You stop praying, you stop caring, you stop getting out of bed. The same temperament that fuels insight can quietly erode faith. Medieval psychology watches this boundary nervously. Historians still argue whether acedia was closer to modern depression or whether it functioned primarily as a moral category. Probably both. The language of sin and the language of mental health overlap heavily here, like two transparent pages laid on top of each other.
You may notice how neatly this links to earlier ideas. Black bile creates the temperament. Saturn reinforces it. Skull shape might hint at it. Dreams reflect it. Everything agrees. The system is internally consistent, even when it's wrong. There's something deeply soothing about that. And yes, there's unintended comedy. Some texts suggest that too much solitude increases melancholy, while others insist solitude is essential for intellectual work. The solution seems to be just enough solitude, which is deeply unhelpful advice. Medieval psychology shrugs and recommends moderation again.
As you breathe slowly, imagine being allowed to be quiet without explanation. No one is rushing you. No one is demanding enthusiasm. Your seriousness is not suspicious. It's expected. In a strange way, medieval melancholy offers permission to be still. At the same time, it gently warns you not to sink too far. Eat warm food. Avoid damp air. Remember the seasons affect you. Remember Saturn presses harder in winter. Remember balance. Always balance. Your thoughts begin to stretch and slow.
lengthening like shadows at dusk. If sadness drifts through, it doesn't alarm you. It's just black bile passing by, doing what it's always done. You don't chase it, you don't fight it, you let it move, trusting that even medieval thinkers believed the mind could return to equilibrium. And as you rest there, heavy but calm, you might almost understand why this idea lasted so long. It makes room for quiet intelligence, for seriousness, for thoughtfulness without panic. It turns gloom into something manageable, even meaningful. So you settle, letting the weight become gentle, letting the darkness soften rather than deepen, and you continue onward, still awake enough to listen, but already drifting, balanced carefully between insight and sleep. You move forward again, gently, because medieval psychology never rushes. And now the calm theories begin to wobble slightly as you enter the territory of madness. This is where imbalance becomes alarming, where melancholy slips its leash, and where explanations grow crowded. You're still you, still breathing slowly in the dark, but now the medieval mind looks at extreme behavior and quietly asks, is this a medical problem, a spiritual crisis, or something invisible and impatient tugging at the soul?
The first answer is almost always imbalance. Too much black bile, overheated yellow bile, or humors corrupted by bad air, poor diet, or planetary pressure. Madness in many medical texts is simply humor theory turned up too high. The mind hasn't shattered, it has overflowed. This is the mainstream historical view taught by physicians, and it's presented calmly, methodically, like a weather report you don't enjoy but accept.
But medieval psychology rarely stops at one explanation. If symptoms persist, visions, violent mood swings, strange speech, uncontrollable laughter or terror, another possibility drifts in quietly. Demons. Not in a theatrical way, not horns and fire, just subtle interference, a whisper here, a pressure there, something nudging the already unbalanced mind in the wrong direction. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed mental illness was caused by demons, or whether demonic language functioned as a cultural metaphor layered onto medical understanding. In practice, the two explanations often coexist peacefully. You might treat madness with herbs, bloodletting, prayer, and confession, all at once. Cover your bases. Medieval psychology is nothing if not thorough.
There's a strange gentleness to this. Madness is frightening, yes, but it's rarely framed as personal failure. Something has gone wrong to you, not because of you. Either your humors betrayed you, or something external slipped in while you were vulnerable. Responsibility shifts away from the sufferer, which is unexpectedly compassionate.
A quirky tidbit that fits here is the belief that certain smells could influence mental health. Foul odors were thought to corrupt the brain, while pleasant scents could soothe it. Herbs, flowers, and incense aren't just decorative, they're preventative psychology. If you're feeling overwhelmed, someone might literally hand you a bouquet and say, "Smell this, you'll feel better." Honestly, not the worst advice.
Madness is also categorized carefully. Frenzy involves agitation, heat, and rage. Melancholic madness is quiet, fearful, withdrawn. Mania is energetic and chaotic. These distinctions matter because treatment depends on them. Cool the hot, warm the cold, calm the frantic, wake the lethargic. It's all very balanced, very measured, even when the subject matter is unsettling. You may notice how spiritual explanations slide in when medicine struggles. If no physical cause can be found, possession becomes more plausible. But even then, it's not always dramatic. Some texts describe demonic influence as subtle, almost bureaucratic. A demon might exaggerate a thought, repeat a fear, or encourage isolation. No screaming required. Very efficient. Historians still argue whether this framework increased fear or offered meaning. To modern ears, demonic explanations sound terrifying. To medieval listeners, they explained why prayer sometimes helped when medicine failed. The mind was porous. The world was crowded. Of course, influence could slip through. There's also a moral layer, but it's quieter than you might expect. Sin can make you vulnerable, but it doesn't automatically make you mad. Madness is not punishment, it's condition. Even saints experience mental torment. Even holy people struggle. This softens judgment, even as it adds complexity. And yes, sometimes it veers into unintended comedy. Some writers seriously debate whether demons prefer warm or cold brains. The conclusion varies. Demons, apparently, are picky tenants. Please keep your humors regulated to avoid unwanted spiritual roommates.
As you breathe slowly, you might notice how medieval psychology refuses to panic. No diagnosis is final. No condition is permanent. Balance can be restored. Spirits can be expelled. Humors can be corrected. Recovery is always theoretically possible, which is a comforting thing to believe when you don't have many tools. You are never reduced to your symptoms. You are still a soul, still a body, still part of a cosmic system, trying, sometimes clumsily, to stay in harmony. Madness is a disruption, not an identity. So as this darker territory settles around you, it doesn't tighten, it loosens. The explanations multiply, yes, but they also spread the weight. No single cause bears all the blame. The night feels calmer again. You let the idea of imbalance drift past without sticking. Your own thoughts feel steady enough. Your breathing slows. Whatever forces medieval thinkers feared, they're not interested in you tonight. You're just listening, resting, humors quiet, mind gently closed, while history murmurs explanations into the dark. You continue on, unhurried, and the atmosphere softens again as medieval psychology turns its attention to something it finds deeply confusing but impossible to ignore: love. Not romance as poetry, not affection as comfort, but love as a condition that alters the body, disturbs the mind, and requires supervision. If your thoughts are racing, your sleep is poor, your appetite has vanished, and one specific person keeps appearing in your dreams, the diagnosis is not having a crush, it is illness. This condition is often called amor hiereos, love sickness. It is discussed seriously in medical texts, philosophical treatises, and even court records. The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval physicians believed intense romantic desire could cause real physical and psychological harm. Love heats the blood, dries the body, and throws the humors into chaos. You are not being dramatic. You are unbalanced. The symptoms are described with surprising accuracy. You grow pale. You sigh frequently. Your pulse changes when the beloved's name is mentioned. You lose interest in food, but obsess over imagined conversations. You stare. You pace. You write terrible poetry. Medieval doctors note all of this with professional concern. Historians still argue whether these descriptions reflect genuine clinical observation or the influence of popular love literature bleeding into medical theory. Possibly both. Love, after all, does that. Love sickness is usually classified as a form of melancholy. Remember black bile? It's back, and it's wearing a romantic disguise. The mind fixates, the imagination loops, reason weakens. This is why love is dangerous. Not because it feels good, but because it traps thought. Medieval psychology distrusts anything that narrows attention too much, including excessive joy. A quirky tidbit that fits perfectly here is how doctors are advised to diagnose love sickness secretly. Asking directly might embarrass the patient, causing denial. Instead, the physician casually mentions names and watches for changes in pulse or expression. If your heart rate spikes when a certain name is dropped, congratulations, you've been medically caught liking someone. Treatment is cautious. If the love is appropriate and achievable, the best cure is fulfillment. Yes, medieval medicine occasionally prescribes marriage. If the love is inappropriate, impossible, or socially inconvenient, well, then things get complicated. Distraction is recommended. Travel, music, exercise, cold baths, prayer, anything to pull the mind away from obsession. Historians still argue whether this approach reflects genuine concern for mental health,
or an attempt to regulate behavior under the authority of medicine. Either way, it acknowledges something important. Emotional fixation can harm well-being. Medieval thinkers just frame it with bile and diagnosis.
There's also a moral tension here. Love is powerful, but it threatens reason, which medieval psychology values deeply. Too much imagination is dangerous. Remember earlier when imagination lived somewhere in the brain or heart, still under debate? This is why. Imagination fuels love, and love bypasses logic entirely. It's basically a hostile takeover. And yet, there's sympathy. Love sickness is not treated as foolishness, it's treated as vulnerability. The sufferer is often young, sensitive, and intellectually inclined. Once again, intelligence and emotional distress seem to share an address.
There's unintended humor, too. Some texts recommend showing the love-sick person the flaws of their beloved. Bad habits, bad hygiene, bad manners. Nothing cures obsession like reality. Medieval psychology quietly invents the icks. Astrology makes an appearance, of course. Venus stirs desire. The moon intensifies longing. Saturn deepens despair when love is unreturned. Your heartbreak is a group project. The planets are involved, and they are not taking feedback.
As you rest, breathing slow and even, the intensity of this topic softens. Love here is not fireworks. It's fatigue, it's sleeplessness, it's quiet fixation. It's the mind stuck in one groove, replaying the same image until exhaustion sets in. You may notice how familiar this feels. Strip away the language, and medieval lovesickness sounds suspiciously modern. The explanation is wrong, but the experience is recognizable. Historians still argue whether this continuity suggests emotional universals or simply good observation wrapped in bad theory. For now, you don't need to diagnose anything. Your mind is free to wander without clinging. No names are being tested, no pulses checked. You're safe from sudden medical matchmaking. So you let the idea of love drift past, acknowledged but not pursued. Your thoughts loosen their grip. The night feels quieter again. Love can wait. Balance, medieval psychology insists, is more important. And balance, at last, is slowly finding you.
You drift onward, still unbroken. And now medieval psychology does something quietly surprising. It opens the body and begins assigning mental functions to specific organs, like a careful librarian shelving thoughts where they seem to fit best. Memory does not float abstractly. Imagination does not hover. Thought has an address, and the address is flexible. You might expect everything to live in the brain. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it absolutely does not. Medieval thinkers inherit multiple overlapping traditions, and they stack them rather than choosing one. The result is a gently confusing internal map, where your mind is spread throughout you, like warmth in a room.
The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval psychology commonly divided mental activity into faculties: imagination, reason, and memory. These faculties were often placed in different parts of the brain's ventricles, the front, middle, and rear cavities, based on interpretations of ancient medical texts. Imagination in the front, reasoning in the middle, memory in the back. It's neat, it's tidy, it's wrong, but it's comforting.
Historians still argue whether these ventricular theories were meant literally or symbolically, but medieval medical illustrations treat them quite seriously. You can almost see little thoughts floating politely from chamber to chamber, following internal architecture like well-behaved guests. But the brain doesn't get exclusive rights. The heart still plays a major role. Emotion, courage, desire, and moral judgment are often seated there. When you feel fear or love, remember lovesickness? That's the heart reacting, not the brain misfiring. The brain may analyze, but the heart experiences. Medieval psychology refuses to choose between them.
And then there's the liver. Yes, the liver. Inherited from ancient physiology, the liver is thought to govern basic vitality and appetite. If you feel sluggish or unmotivated, it's not depression, it's liver-related. Somewhere, a medieval doctor is nodding wisely and suggesting dietary changes.
A quirky tidbit that fits perfectly here is the belief that excessive imagination can physically damage you. If you imagine frightening or sinful things too often, it overheats the brain, dries the humors, and weakens reason. This is why daydreaming is suspicious. Please stop imagining things and go outside.
Memory, meanwhile, is treated almost reverently. It is slow, heavy, and deeply tied to bodily condition. Cold brains remember better. Overheated brains forget. This leads to practical advice. Study in cool rooms, avoid rich food, and do not think too hard when you're tired. Medieval psychology invents study tips centuries early. Historians still argue whether this distributed model of the mind made people more aware of bodily signals or simply reinforced superstition. Either way, it encourages constant bodily awareness. How do you feel? Where do you feel it? Which organ is complaining?
These ideas also explain personality differences. Someone imaginative but poor at reasoning simply has an overactive front ventricle. Someone logical but emotionally distant relies too heavily on the middle chamber. Balance, once again, is the goal. Always balance. There's unintended humor in how specific this becomes. Forgetfulness after illness, rear ventricle weakness, poor judgment, middle ventricle obstruction, too many ideas at once, front ventricle enthusiasm. Medieval psychology could diagnose a headache with impressive confidence.
And yet, there's something soothing about the mind being embodied. Your thoughts are not floating mysteries. They're physical processes happening somewhere tangible. If you feel scattered, it's because something inside needs rest, warmth, or cooling. The solution is not panic, it's adjustment. This connects neatly back to earlier ideas. Humors affect organs. Organs house faculties. Planets influence humors. Dreams reflect internal states. Everything loops. The system hums softly, self-reinforcing, like a clock that doesn't tell accurate time, but never stops ticking. As you breathe slowly, you may notice how relaxing it is to imagine your thoughts settling into place. Memory resting gently in the back of the head. Imagination quieting in front. Reason dimming in the middle. Nothing rushing, nothing demanding. You don't need to locate your own faculties tonight. No one is mapping your ventricles. Your organs are allowed to be quiet. Medieval psychology may want to label and assign everything, but for now, it loosens its grip. So you rest there, mind spread gently through body, thoughts slowing as if being shelved one by one, until there's nothing left to organize, only calm, steady breathing, and the quiet sense that wherever your thoughts live, they're settling in for the night.
You continue drifting forward, carried by the same unbroken current, and medieval psychology now turns its attention to beginnings. Not your memories, not your dreams, but the moment you first arrive in the world. Long before personality tests or childhood development charts, medieval thinkers are already confident about one thing. You are not a blank slate. You arrive tempered, inclined, and quietly should before you ever open your eyes.
At birth, your body is believed to carry a specific balance of humors that sets the tone for your life. Some children are warm and moist, others cold and dry. This balance explains why one baby cries constantly, while another lies peacefully staring at the ceiling, like a tiny philosopher. The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval medicine held temperament to be largely innate, determined at birth by bodily composition and environmental conditions during pregnancy.
Astrology returns right on cue. The hour of your birth matters. The position of the moon, the influence of Saturn or Jupiter, the rising sign, all of it presses gently onto your developing mind. You are born under a sky that leaves fingerprints on your personality. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were taken as fixed destiny or probabilistic tendency. Most evidence suggests the latter. You are shaped, not sentenced.
There is also deep concern for the mother's mental state during pregnancy.
Strong emotions, fear, grief, or excessive imagination are thought to impress themselves upon the child. If the mother worries too much, the child may grow anxious. If she gazes too long at something frightening, the child may inherit strange tendencies. Medieval psychology watches pregnancy very closely, trying not to startle it. A quirky tidbit that fits perfectly here is the belief that cravings influence temperament. If a pregnant woman desires sour foods, the child may be sharp-minded. If she craves sweetness, the child may be gentle. This gives new meaning to prenatal snacks. Somewhere, a medieval family is judging personality based on pickles. Children are not thought of as unfinished adults. They are fully formed temperaments in small bodies. Education does not create character, it refines it. This shapes medieval teaching methods. You don't try to make every child the same. You guide them according to their nature. The lively child needs structure. The quiet child needs encouragement. The melancholic child needs warmth and reassurance. Historians still argue whether this approach allowed for early emotional sensitivity or simply locked children into expectations too early. If a child is labeled choleric, are they allowed to change? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. The line between understanding and limitation is thin. There is also moral weight here. A child born with difficult temperament is not blamed, but they are watched carefully. Certain inclinations, anger, laziness, excessive sadness, require guidance before they harden into habit. Medieval psychology is very concerned with habit. What you repeat becomes you. You may notice how this loops back to everything else. Humors explain temperament. Planets explain timing. Organs explain mental function. Nothing contradicts. Everything layers. The system is complete enough to feel convincing, especially when spoken softly at night. There's unintended humor, too. Some texts seriously suggest that red-haired children are more volatile due to heat and dryness. Personality explained by hair color. Please note that medieval psychology is doing its best. As you lie there listening, this belief in early temperament carries a strange comfort. You don't have to invent yourself from nothing. You've always been something. Your quirks are old. Your tendencies have history. At the same time, medieval thinkers insist that balance can still be achieved. Diet, education, prayer, environment, all can soften extremes. Nature sets the tone. Nurture adjusts the volume. You breathe slowly, imagining yourself as that child, arriving already inclined towards certain thoughts, certain moods, not judged, just observed, guided gently, sometimes clumsily, but with intention. And as the night deepens, the idea that personality begins early begins to fade into something softer. You are still allowed to change. Medieval psychology believes in habit, but it also believes in correction. Nothing is frozen. Everything moves, slowly. So you rest there, your beginnings acknowledged, your tendencies forgiven, your future unworried. Whatever you were born with has carried you this far, and for now, that is enough. You drift forward into the final stretch, and medieval psychology begins to blur into something gentler, almost familiar. The sharp definitions of humors, organs, planets, and predispositions soften, giving way to the early stirrings of reason, observation, and cautious reflection. The world of strict systems and divine oversight gradually relaxes, acknowledging that the mind and body are more flexible than once thought. You are still you, breathing slowly in the quiet, but the explanations feel less like rules and more like gentle suggestions. By this point, some thinkers begin experimenting with empirical observation, noting patterns without immediately attributing them to spirits or planets. They start keeping records of mood changes, physical symptoms, and social behaviors, comparing them across seasons and regions. The mainstream historical fact here is that the later Middle Ages saw the early stirrings of scientific inquiry in medicine and psychology, as scholars began emphasizing observation over pure theory.
Historians still argue whether this shift represents the birth of modern psychology or merely an incremental adjustment within an older framework, but it signals the end of total reliance on traditional humors and celestial influence. You notice how this gradual drift mirrors your own slowing thoughts. The mind is no longer a battleground of opposing forces, but a landscape to observe, quietly and without panic. Balance is less about correcting every deviation and more about noticing, adapting, and letting the body and mind settle naturally. Diet remains important, but moderation matters more than precise humoral calculations. Sleep, rest, and simple routines begin to take priority.
A quirky tidbit that persists even here is the gentle belief that certain sensory experiences, music, soft light, pleasant smells, can subtly influence your mind's equilibrium. Incense, harp music, and warm rooms are still recommended as minor interventions, comforting rather than corrective. Somewhere, medieval psychology quietly invents early relaxation techniques centuries before anyone called it that. You might hum a simple tune, imagine a fragrant garden, or let the candlelight play across the walls, and your mind adjusts imperceptibly.
Love, dreams, and temperament are no longer strict rules, but they remain guides. Dreams are interesting, but not prophetic. Love is acknowledged, but not treated as illness unless extreme. Early temperament shapes tendencies, but education, environment, and reflection are finally given a say. The brain, heart, liver, and humors are all still acknowledged, but they are no longer dictators of your nightly experience. The system eases into a gentle advisory role, much like a trusted companion offering guidance rather than enforcing commands.
You can feel the weight of centuries of observation, missteps, and refinement as a calm presence around you. The mistakes, the eccentricities, the bizarre prescriptions, all of it contributes to an underlying truth. Humans are complex, and understanding requires patience. This is a lesson you can carry gently into sleep. You are observed, interpreted, but never strictly defined. There is room to rest, to fluctuate, to breathe, and to simply be.
And now the wind down begins. The night stretches long and quiet. Your humors settle, neither too hot nor too cold. The planets continue their slow march across the sky, indifferent but steady. The organs of your body, your faculties, and your imagination all drift into soft rhythm. Thoughts that worried you gently fade. Melancholy eases into contentment. Love becomes a distant, warm echo. Dreams float softly, harmless and fleeting. Breathe slowly. Notice the gentle hum of your environment. Imagine the faint flicker of candlelight, the soft rustle of fabric, the coolness of the night air. Your body is still. Your mind is calm. Every part of you, once analyzed, diagnosed, and observed, is finally resting. Medieval psychology has done its work, not to alarm, not to judge, but to offer perspective and comfort. You are balanced, if only for a moment, and that is enough. Sleep approaches like a slow tide, gentle and inevitable. Let it carry you. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to organize your thoughts or check your pulse. Just breathe. The humors are quiet. The planets continue their distant dance. Dreams drift. Balance, subtle and calm, enfolds you. The night is yours, soft and infinite. You are allowed to rest completely now. The night is gentle, the lesson soft. There is no urgency, no pressure, no judgment. Only the slow, comforting rhythm of your body and mind in alignment. You may drift into sleep with the quiet understanding that humans have always sought to explain themselves, gently, imperfectly, with curiosity and care. Let the air, the silence,
and the faint candle glow guide you into dreams that are soft, safe, and restorative. End of script. Sweet dreams.